The moving truck pulled away from the small house on Maple Street, leaving 12-year-old Marcus Thompson standing on the front porch with his mother, Sarah. The October air was crisp, and leaves were falling from the big oak tree in their new front yard. Marcus looked down the quiet street and wondered what his new life in Millfield would be like. "This will be good for us, baby," Sarah said, putting her arm around her son's shoulders. "A fresh start in a nice, quiet town." Marcus nodded, but he felt nervous butterflies in his stomach. He had moved many times before because his father was in the military, but this felt different. His dad, Colonel James Thompson, was far away on a secret mission somewhere overseas. For the first time in his life, Marcus would be starting a new school without knowing when his father would come home. Sarah had taken a job as a nurse at Millfield General Hospital. The town only had about 5,000 people, much smaller than the military base where they used to live. Here, everyone knew everyone else, and Marcus worried about being the outsider. That first night, Marcus unpacked his books in his new bedroom. He loved to read, especially stories about history and adventure. On his nightstand, he placed his most precious possession, a framed photo of him and his father at a military ceremony. In the picture, both of them were wearing dress uniforms, and his father's chest was covered with medals and ribbons. Marcus remembered that day clearly. His father had knelt down to his eye level and said, "Son, real strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about having discipline, showing respect to others, and protecting people who can't protect themselves. A real man never uses his power to hurt someone weaker." Those words had stuck with Marcus through every move, every new school, and every challenge he faced. The next morning, Sarah drove Marcus to Millfield Middle School. The building was old and much smaller than his previous school. Only about 300 kids went there from 6th grade through 8th grade. As they walked to the office, Marcus noticed how the other students stared at him. He was used to being stared at. He was often one of the few black kids in his classes. But in this small town, he felt like everyone was looking at him. "You'll do great," Sarah whispered as she hugged him goodbye. "Just be yourself." The school secretary, Mrs. Wilson, was kind and helped Marcus find his first class. His teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, introduced him to the class as their new student, from a military family. Marcus stood at the front of the room, feeling all eyes on him as he said a quiet hello to his new classmates. During the first few classes, Marcus tried to pay attention and take good notes. The work seemed easier than what he was used to at his old school on the military base. When teachers asked questions, Marcus often knew the answers, but he didn't want to seem like a show-off on his first day. At lunchtime, Marcus got his food from the cafeteria and looked around for a place to sit. All the tables seemed to have established groups of friends who had known each other for years. He found an empty table in the corner and sat down with his sandwich and apple. He pulled out a book about World War II from his backpack and began reading while he ate. As Marcus read about D-Day and the brave soldiers who fought in France, he didn't notice the group of older boys watching him from across the cafeteria. Brad Hutchins, a 13-year-old 8th grader, was sitting with his friends Tyler and Jake. Brad was bigger than most kids his age, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they belonged on a grown man. "Look at the new kid," Brad said to his friends, his voice full of dislike. "Thinks he's better than everyone else, sitting alone with his fancy book." Tyler, who always agreed with whatever Brad said, nodded. "Yeah, where's he even from? Doesn't look like he belongs here." Brad had been held back in school the year before, which made him older and bigger than most of his classmates. At home, his father, Rick Hutchins, often talked about how outsiders were ruining their town and their country. Rick especially didn't like people who looked different from his family, and he had filled Brad's head with angry ideas about who deserved to live in their community. Jake, the third boy in the group, felt uncomfortable, but didn't say anything. He had learned that disagreeing with Brad usually meant becoming his next target. After lunch, Marcus went outside for recess. Most of the other kids were playing basketball or hanging out in groups, talking and laughing. Marcus found a quiet spot under a large maple tree and continued reading his book. The October sun felt warm on his face, and for a moment he felt peaceful. That peace didn't last long. "Hey, new boy," a loud voice called out. Marcus looked up from his book to see Brad Hutchins walking toward him with Tyler and Jake following behind. Marcus could tell from their expressions that this wasn't going to be a friendly welcome. "What's your name?" Brad asked, standing over Marcus with his arms crossed. "Marcus," he replied quietly, closing his book but staying seated against the tree. "Marcus what?" Brad's voice was getting louder, and other kids on the playground were starting to notice. "Marcus Thompson," Brad smirked. "Thompson, huh? Where are you from, Thompson? You don't look like you're from around here." Marcus felt his heart beating faster, but he remembered his father's lessons about staying calm. "We just moved here from Fort Bragg. My mom got a job at the hospital." "Fort Bragg?" Tyler laughed. "That's a military base. Is your daddy a soldier boy?" "My father is deployed overseas," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Brad's expression changed, becoming even more unpleasant. "So, he's one of those military guys, huh? Thinks he's some kind of hero?" Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. His father had taught him that bullies wanted him to get upset, and the best thing to do was not give them what they wanted. "I should get back to class," Marcus said, standing up and putting his book in his backpack. But Brad stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "I don't think I said you could leave, Thompson. Maybe you need to learn some manners about how things work in this town." The playground had gotten quieter as more kids noticed what was happening. Some of them looked worried, but nobody stepped forward to help. Marcus realized that Brad ruled this school through fear, and everyone was too scared to stand up to him. "I don't want any trouble," Marcus said, trying to walk around Brad, but Brad pushed him back against the tree. "Well, maybe trouble found you anyway, Thompson. Maybe you should have stayed where you came from." Just then the bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Brad leaned close to Marcus and whispered, "This isn't over, new boy. Not even close." As Brad and his friends walked away, Marcus stood against the tree, his hands shaking slightly. He looked around at the other students who were heading back to class, and he saw the mixture of pity and fear in their eyes. Nobody met his gaze directly. Marcus picked up his backpack and walked toward the school building. He thought about his father somewhere far away, fighting real enemies in a real war. His dad had faced much worse than a school bully, and Marcus was determined to make him proud by handling this situation with the same courage and discipline his father had taught him. But as he walked into the school, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of his troubles in Millfield. The next morning, Marcus walked into school hoping that maybe Brad had forgotten about him. Maybe yesterday was just a one-time thing, and today would be better. But as soon as he stepped through the front doors, he knew he was wrong. Brad was waiting by the lockers with Tyler and Jake. When he saw Marcus, a mean smile spread across his face. As Marcus walked down the hallway to his locker, Brad stepped directly into his path. Well, if it isn't Soldier Boy," Brad said loudly, making sure other students could hear. "Did you call your daddy last night to cry about the mean kids at school?" Marcus tried to walk around Brad, but Tyler moved to block him from the other side. Students in the hallway slowed down to watch, but nobody said anything to help. "My father is serving our country," Marcus said quietly, looking Brad in the eye. Brad laughed harshly. "Serving our country? You mean killing people in other countries, where he doesn't belong? Just like you don't belong here." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but he forced himself to relax them. His father had taught him that violence should always be the last choice, and only when protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. "Excuse me," Marcus said, trying once more to get past the three bullies. This time Brad let him pass, but as Marcus walked away, Brad called out, "This isn't over, Thompson." Not by a long shot. In first period English class, Marcus tried to focus on the lesson about poetry. When the teacher, Mrs. Patterson, asked questions about the poem they were reading, Marcus raised his hand several times. He enjoyed English and was good at understanding what poems really meant. But every time Marcus gave a correct answer, he heard Brad whisper something mean from the back of the room. "Show off," Brad would mutter, or "thinks he's so smart." Mrs. Patterson didn't seem to hear, or maybe she was ignoring it. During second period math class, things got worse. The teacher, Mr. Johnson, handed back their quiz from the previous week. Marcus had scored a 98, the highest grade in the class. When Mr. Johnson announced the top scores, Brad's face turned red with anger. After class, as Marcus was putting his quiz in his folder, Brad knocked into him hard, making Marcus drop all his papers on the floor. "Oops," Brad said with fake innocence. "Sorry about that, Thompson. Maybe you should watch where you're going." Marcus knelt down to pick up his scattered papers while other students walked around him. A girl named Emma looked like she wanted to help, but when she saw Brad watching, she hurried past without stopping. At lunch, Marcus sat at the same corner table as the day before. He had brought a peanut butter sandwich from home and planned to spend lunch reading his book about World War II. But before he could even unwrap his sandwich, Brad appeared at his table. "Mind if we sit here, Thompson?" Brad asked, already sitting down without waiting for an answer. Tyler and Jake sat down too, surrounding Marcus. "This is a free country, right?" Brad continued. "Or wait, maybe not for people like you." Marcus didn't respond. He unwrapped his sandwich and took a small bite, trying to ignore the three bullies. "What's that you're reading?" Brad grabbed Marcus's book before he could stop him. "World War II, huh? Let me guess. You think America was the good guy in that war?" "America fought against fascism and racism," Marcus said quietly. Brad flipped through the pages of the book roughly. "Racism? You think everything is about racism, don't you, Thompson? Maybe some people just don't belong in certain places." Tyler laughed like Brad had said something funny. Jake looked uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything to defend Marcus. "Can I have my book back, please?" Marcus asked. Instead of giving it back, Brad held the book over his head and pretended like he was going to drop it on the floor. "Say please like you mean it, Thompson." Marcus felt his face getting hot with anger, but he remembered his father's words about keeping control. "Please give me my book back." Brad dropped the book on the table with a loud thud. "There you go. Soldier boy. Try not to cry about it." The three bullies got up and left, laughing as they walked away. Marcus picked up his book and checked to make sure none of the pages were torn. His hands were shaking slightly, but he was proud that he hadn't lost his temper. The afternoon brought more problems. In science class, Marcus was partnered with a quiet boy named David for a lab experiment. They were supposed to work together to measure different liquids, but Brad kept walking by their table and bumping into Marcus, making him spill the water they were measuring. "Sorry," Brad would say each time, grinning. "I'm so clumsy today." Their teacher, Ms. Roberts, was busy helping other students and didn't notice what was happening. Marcus and David had to start their experiment over 3 times because of Brad's accidents. After school, Marcus walked to his locker to get his homework books. As he opened his locker door, he found a note that had been slipped through the vents. The note was written in black marker and said, "Go back where you came from. Nobody wants you here." Marcus looked around to see if anyone was watching him read the note. Brad was at his own locker down the hall talking to Tyler and Jake. When Brad saw Marcus looking his way, he smiled and waved like they were friends. Marcus crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash can. He gathered his books and walked out of school, trying to look normal even though his stomach felt sick. On the walk home, Marcus thought about telling his mother what was happening. But when he got to their house, he could see through the kitchen window that Sarah was sitting at the table with papers spread out in front of her, looking tired and stressed. She was still learning her new job at the hospital and working long hours. "Hey, baby," she said when Marcus came through the door. "How was school today?" Marcus forced a smile. "It was fine, Mom, just getting used to everything." Sarah studied his face carefully. "You sure? You look a little upset about something." "I'm just tired," Marcus said. "Can I go do my homework?" That night, Marcus sat at his desk trying to focus on his math problems, but his mind kept wandering. He looked at the photo of him and his father in their military uniforms. His dad looked so strong and confident in the picture. Marcus wondered what his father would do in this situation. He remembered a conversation they had when he was younger. His father had said, "Son, there will always be people in this world who try to make you feel small because of who you are or what you look like. But you can't let their hate make you hate them back. You have to be better than that." Marcus wanted to be better than that, but it was getting harder every day. Before going to bed, Marcus wrote in the journal his father had given him. He wrote about his day, about Brad and his friends, and about how lonely he felt at his new school. Writing helped him feel a little better, like he was talking to his father even though he was far away. As Marcus turned off his light and tried to go to sleep, he could hear his mother on the phone in the living room, talking to someone about work. Her voice sounded tired and worried. Marcus didn't want to add to her problems by telling her about Brad. He would handle this himself, just like his father would want him to. But deep down, Marcus was starting to worry that things were going to get much worse before they got better. 3 months had passed since Marcus started at Millfield Middle School, and Brad's harassment had become part of his daily routine. Every morning brought new insults. Every lunch period meant sitting alone while Brad and his friends whispered and pointed, and every walk through the hallways was a test of Marcus's patience and self-control. But something was changing in Brad. The fact that Marcus never fought back, never cried, and never seemed to break was making Brad angrier and more frustrated. At home, his father Rick had been complaining more and more about outsiders moving into their town, and Brad felt pressure to do something more serious about the Thompson family. It was a cold Friday afternoon in late October when everything changed, forever. Marcus had stayed after school to finish a science project in the library. Most of the other students had already gone home and the building was quiet except for the sound of janitors cleaning classrooms. When Marcus finally packed up his books and left the school, the sun was already getting low in the sky. He decided to take his usual route home through Millfield Park, a peaceful place with old trees, a small pond, and a playground where little kids played during warmer weather. Marcus was walking along the path that led past the duck pond, thinking about the letter he wanted to write to his father that weekend. He had finally decided to tell his dad about the problems at school, not to complain, but to ask for advice on how to handle the situation better. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the 3 figures following him from a distance. Brad, Tyler, and Jake had been waiting outside the school for Marcus to come out. They had planned this for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity when no adults would be around to stop them. Brad was carrying a baseball bat he had taken from the gym, and his face was twisted with anger and hate. "There he is," Brad whispered to his friends as they watched Marcus walking alone through the park. "Today we're going to teach him a lesson he'll never forget." Tyler looked nervous. "Are you sure about this, Brad? What if we get in trouble?" "We won't get caught," Brad said. "And even if we do, it'll be worth it to get rid of him." Jake was feeling sick to his stomach, but he was too scared of Brad to speak up. He had watched Brad's harassment of Marcus get worse and worse, and now he knew they were about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Marcus was halfway around the pond when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw Brad, Tyler, and Jake walking toward him with purpose. Something about their expressions made Marcus's heart start beating faster. "Well, well, soldier boy," Brad called out, his voice echoing across the empty park. "Out! Here all alone, are you?" Marcus kept walking, hoping they would lose interest if he ignored them, but the footsteps behind him got faster, and soon the 3 bullies had caught up with him. "I'm talking to you, Thompson," Brad shouted, grabbing Marcus's shoulder and spinning him around. "I don't want any trouble," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm even though he could see the baseball bat in Brad's hand. "Too bad," Brad said, pushing Marcus backward, "because trouble found you." Tyler and Jake spread out to surround Marcus, cutting off any escape route. Marcus realized that this time was different from all the other confrontations. This time, Brad wasn't just trying to embarrass him or make him feel bad. This time, Brad wanted to hurt him badly. "You know what your problem is, Thompson?" Brad said, moving closer. "You think you're better than us. You think because your daddy is some kind of soldier that makes you special." "I never said I was better than anyone," Marcus replied, backing away slowly. "But you think it," Brad continued, his voice getting louder and more angry. "You come into our school, into our town, acting like you own the place, getting better grades than us, making us look stupid." Marcus bumped into a park bench behind him and realized he had nowhere else to go. The 3 bullies were closing in, and Brad was gripping the baseball bat tighter. "You want to know what I think about your soldier daddy?" Brad said, his face red with anger. I think he's a murderer. I think he kills innocent people in other countries for no good reason. And I think the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That was the moment Marcus's self-control finally cracked. Don't you dare talk about my father that way, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. Brad smiled cruelly. What are you going to do about it, Thompson? Are you finally going to fight back? Or are you just going to stand there like the coward you are? Marcus thought about his father's teachings about discipline and control. He thought about the promise he had made to himself to be better than his enemies. But he also thought about the months of harassment, the racist notes, the constant fear and humiliation. My father is a hero, Marcus said quietly. He fights to protect people like you, even though you don't deserve it. Wrong answer, Brad said, and without warning he swung the baseball bat at Marcus's head. Marcus ducked just in time, and the bat whistled through the air where his head had been a second before. He tried to run, but Tyler grabbed his backpack and pulled him to the ground. Hold him, Brad shouted, and Jake reluctantly grabbed Marcus's arm while Tyler held the other one. Marcus struggled to get free, but the two boys were bigger and stronger than he was. Brad stood over him with the baseball bat raised above his head. This is what happens to people who don't know their place, Brad said. Just then, a voice called out from across the park. Hey, what are you boys doing over there? Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a 70-year-old retired teacher, was walking her small dog near the playground when she heard the shouting. She couldn't see clearly what was happening, but she could tell that something was very wrong. Brad looked toward the old woman, then back at Marcus. His anger was too strong to stop now, even with a witness present. Mind your own business, old lady, Brad yelled back. Mrs. Patterson pulled out her cell phone and started dialing 911, but she was too far away to stop what happened next. Brad brought the bat down hard, aiming for Marcus's head. Marcus managed to turn slightly, so the bat hit his shoulder instead of his skull, but the impact was still terrible. He cried out in pain and felt something crack in his shoulder. That's what you get, Brad screamed, hitting Marcus again, this time in the ribs. Tyler and Jake let go of Marcus's arms and stepped back, both of them looking scared and sick. This had gone much further than they had expected. Marcus curled up on the ground, trying to protect himself as Brad continued to hit him with the bat. He could hear Mrs. Patterson screaming in the distance and the sound of sirens getting closer, but everything seemed far away and dreamlike. The beating finally stopped when police cars came roaring into the park with their lights flashing. Brad dropped the bat and tried to run, but officers quickly surrounded all three boys. As the paramedics worked on Marcus, loading him into an ambulance, he looked up at the darkening sky and thought about his father. He had tried so hard to follow his dad's teachings about peace and discipline, but in the end, violence had found him anyway. The last thing Marcus remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of his mother crying as she arrived at the scene, and the terrible realization that his life in Millfield would never be the same again. Colonel James Thompson was deep in the mountains of Afghanistan when the emergency message reached him. He was leading a dangerous mission to rescue captured soldiers when his commanding officer pulled him aside with news that would change everything. Thompson, you need to get to communications immediately, Major Williams said, his face serious. There's been an emergency with your family. James felt his blood turn cold as he ran to the communication tent. In 20 years of military service, he had never received an emergency family message during a mission. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the secure phone. Colonel Thompson, this is Red Cross Emergency Services, the voice on the other end said. Sir, your son Marcus has been severely injured in an attack. He's alive but in serious condition at Millfield General Hospital. The world seemed to stop moving around James. What kind of attack? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sir, your son was beaten by 3 other boys with a baseball bat. He has a broken shoulder, cracked ribs, and a serious head injury. Your wife Sarah is requesting your immediate return. James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he could see his 12-year-old son's face, always so serious and thoughtful, trying so hard to make his father proud. The thought of Marcus lying in a hospital bed, hurt and afraid, made James feel a rage he had never experienced before. I'll be there as soon as possible, James said. Within 6 hours, James was on a military transport plane flying toward the United States. During the long flight, he had time to think about what had happened and what he would do when he got home. His training had taught him to control his emotions and make logical decisions, but his heart was screaming for justice. The plane couldn't fly fast enough. James stared out the window at the clouds below and thought about all the times he had missed in Marcus's life because of deployments, birthday parties, school plays, baseball games, all sacrificed for his duty to his country. And now when his son needed him most, he had been thousands of miles away. When the plane finally landed at Fort Bragg, James still wore his combat uniform with dust from the Afghan mountains on his boots. He didn't take time to change clothes, or even call Sarah. He jumped into his truck and drove straight to Millfield Hospital, his heart pounding the entire way. At the hospital, James ran through the halls until he found Marcus's room. When he saw his son lying in the hospital bed, he had to grab the door frame to steady himself. Marcus's face was swollen and bruised, his left eye completely closed. His head was wrapped in white bandages, and his arm was in a sling. Sarah was sitting beside the bed holding Marcus's good hand. When she saw James, she broke down crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have protected him. I should have seen this coming." James held his wife while she cried, but his eyes never left his son. Marcus was awake but groggy from pain medication. When he saw his father, he tried to smile through his swollen lips. "Dad?" Marcus's voice was weak and hoarse. "You came home." "Of course I came home," James said, moving to the bedside. "I'll always come home when you need me." "I tried to remember what you taught me," Marcus whispered. "I didn't fight back. I tried to be disciplined like you said." James felt his heart breaking. His son had followed his teachings about avoiding violence, and it had nearly gotten him killed. He leaned down and gently kissed Marcus's forehead. "You did everything right, son," James said. "I'm so proud of you." But inside, James was burning with anger, not at Marcus, but at the boys who had done this to his child, and at the system that had failed to protect him. The next morning, James went to the Millfield police station to learn about the investigation. Detective Rodriguez explained that 3 boys had been arrested: Brad Hutchins, Tyler Mitchell, and Jake Sullivan. Brad was being charged with assault with a deadly weapon, while the other 2 were charged as accessories. "The problem is," Detective Vio Rodriguez said, "they're all minors. Brad will probably get juvenile detention and community service. The other 2 might just get probation." James felt his jaw clench. "That's it? They nearly killed my son, and that's all that happens to them." "I understand your frustration, Colonel Thompson," the detective said, "but the juvenile justice system is designed to rehabilitate kids, not punish them like adults." After leaving the police station, James drove to the school to meet with Principal Williams. The principal was nervous and apologetic, explaining that they had no idea the harassment had gotten so serious. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for bullying," Principal Williams said, "but Marcus never reported any incidents to us." "So you're blaming my son for not reporting his own harassment?" James asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, sir, that's not what I meant," the principal said quickly. "We just wish we had known sooner so we could have intervened." James studied the principal's face and realized the man was more worried about the school getting sued than he was about Marcus's welfare. This made James even angrier, but he kept his voice controlled. "What are you going to do to make sure this never happens to another child?" James asked. The principal promised to review their anti-bullying policies and provide better training for teachers, but James could tell these were just empty words meant to make the problem go away. That afternoon, James had his most difficult meeting yet. He went to the police station to see Rick Hutchins, Brad's father, who was there to pick up his son's belongings. Rick was a large man with rough hands and a permanent scowl. When he saw James approaching, he looked him up and down, with obvious dislike. "You must be the soldier boy's daddy," Rick said with a sneer. James stopped a few feet away from Rick, his military bearing making him look taller and more imposing than he actually was. "I'm Colonel Thompson, yes." "Well, Colonel," Rick said, the title like it was something dirty. "Maybe this will teach your boy to know his place in this town." Some people just don't belong here. James felt every muscle in his body tense. In his 20 years of military service, he had faced terrorists, enemy soldiers, and dangerous criminals. But he had never wanted to hurt someone as much as he wanted to hurt Rick Hutchins in that moment. "What did you just say?" James asked, his voice so quiet it was barely audible. Something in James's tone made Rick take a step backward. For the first time, Rick realized he might be facing someone much more dangerous than the small-town bullies he was used to dealing with. I just meant," Rick stammered. "You meant that my 12-year-old son deserved to be beaten with a baseball bat because of the color of his skin," James said, taking a step closer. Rick could see something in James's eyes that made him truly afraid for the first time in years. This wasn't just an angry father. This was a trained killer who had spent years learning how to neutralize threats. "Now listen here," Rick tried to bluster, but his voice was shaking. "No, you listen," James said. "Your son nearly murdered my child. And you think that's acceptable? That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are." James turned and walked away before he did something he would regret. But as he left the police station, he was already forming a plan. He wouldn't get justice through violence or revenge. He would get it through something much more powerful and lasting. He would change this town, one heart and mind at a time. Colonel James Thompson sat in his son's hospital room for 3 days, watching Marcus slowly recover from his injuries. During those long hours, James had time to think about his next move. His military training told him to plan carefully and strike with precision, but this battle wouldn't be fought with weapons or force. On the 4th day, James put his plan into action. He started by visiting Millfield Community Church, where Pastor Williams had offered to help in any way possible. The church was packed that Sunday morning when James walked to the front in his dress uniform, his chest covered with medals and ribbons. "My name is Colonel James Thompson," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent church. "Most of you know that my 12-year-old son Marcus was brutally attacked last week by 3 boys from your community." The congregation shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. Many had heard about the attack, but few knew the details. "I've spent 20 years fighting for this country," James continued. "I've seen real evil in the world, and I've learned that the only way to defeat hatred is with understanding, patience, and love." James told the story of Marcus's months of harassment, the racist notes, and the final violent attack. He spoke about his son's courage in never fighting back and about the failure of adults to protect an innocent child. "I could be angry," James said, looking around the room. "I could demand revenge. But that wouldn't honor my son's courage, and it wouldn't solve the real problem. The real problem is that we've allowed hatred to grow in our community like a disease." When James finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Pastor Williams stood up and asked the congregation to pray for healing, not just for Marcus, but for their entire community. After church, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the elderly woman who had witnessed the attack, approached James with tears in her eyes. "Colonel Thompson," she said, "I've been teaching in this town for 40 years, and I've watched good kids turn bad because nobody taught them better. If you're serious about changing things, I want to help." That was the beginning of what became known as the Millfield movement. Mrs. Patterson organized a group of retired teachers, concerned parents, and community leaders who wanted to address the root causes of hatred and bullying in their town. James spoke at schools, community centers, and town hall meetings. He shared stories from his military service about working with people from different backgrounds and cultures. He explained how diversity made military units stronger, not weaker. But James's most important work happened in a place nobody expected, the juvenile detention center where Brad Hutchins was being held. When James first asked to visit Brad, the detention center staff was confused. "Are you sure, Colonel?" the director asked. "This is the boy who attacked your son." "I'm sure," James replied. Brad was terrified when he was told that Marcus's father wanted to see him. He expected threats, maybe even violence. Instead, James sat across from him in the visiting room and pulled out a photo of Marcus from before the attack. "Tell me what you see when you look at this picture," James said calmly. Brad stared at the photo of Marcus smiling in his school clothes. "I don't know what you want me to say," Brad mumbled. "I want you to see what I see," James said. "I see a boy who loves to read, a boy who writes letters to his father overseas, a boy who helps his mother with groceries and does his homework without being asked. I see my son." Brad looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened, but what?" James interrupted gently. "But he deserved it because of his skin color? But he didn't belong in your town? But his father serves a country that includes people like you?" For the first time, Brad really looked at the photo. He had spent so many months seeing Marcus as a target, as something less than human, that he had forgotten Marcus was a real person with feelings and dreams. James visited Brad 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. During these visits, he learned about Brad's home life, about his father's angry words and violent temper. James began to understand that Brad was as much a victim as Marcus, poisoned by hatred he had learned from adults who should have taught him better. "My father says people like your son are destroying America," Brad said during their 3rd meeting. "And what do you think?" James asked. Brad was quiet for a long time. I think maybe I was wrong," he finally whispered. Meanwhile, Marcus was recovering at home, his physical wounds healing faster than the emotional ones. He had nightmares about the attack and jumped at sudden noises. But when his father told him about the visits with Brad, Marcus surprised everyone. "I want to see him," Marcus said. "Are you sure, son?" James asked. "You don't have to forgive him." "No," Marcus replied. "But you taught me that real strength comes from helping people change, not from staying angry forever." The meeting between Marcus and Brad was arranged at the community center, with James, Sarah, and a counselor present. When Brad saw Marcus's still healing injuries, he broke down completely. "I'm sorry," Brad sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was angry and stupid, and I hurt you for no good reason." Marcus, showing wisdom far beyond his 12 years, looked at the boy, who had nearly killed him. "I forgive you," he said quietly, "but you have to promise to be better." "I promise," Brad whispered. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did." The transformation didn't happen overnight. Brad had to serve 6 months in juvenile detention and complete 2 years of community service. But with James's guidance and the support of the Millfield movement, Brad began to change. He started by writing letters of apology to every student he had ever bullied. He volunteered at the community center, helping younger kids with homework. Most importantly, he stood up to his father's racist comments and chose to think for himself. When Brad was released from detention, the first person waiting for him was Marcus. The 2 boys, once bitter enemies, had become unlikely friends through letters and supervised visits. Marcus's grades improved and he joined the school's debate team. Brad became his biggest supporter, defending Marcus against any student who made racist comments. Tyler and Jake, inspired by Brad's transformation, also apologized and changed their behavior. The ripple effect spread throughout Millfield. The school implemented new anti-bullying programs. Parents started having difficult conversations with their children about prejudice and hatred. The community center began hosting diversity workshops and cultural events. 2 years later, James was preparing for another deployment when Marcus approached him with a school essay he had written about courage. "Real courage," Marcus had written, "isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared. My father showed me that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's turning them into friends." James read the essay with tears in his eyes. His son had learned the most important lesson of all, that love and understanding were more powerful than hatred and violence. As James prepared to leave for his new mission, he knew that Marcus would be safe. Not because the bullies were gone, but because the community had learned to protect all its children, regardless of their color, background, or beliefs. The boy who had once been a victim had become a leader, and the community that had failed him had found a way to heal. It was the greatest victory of James Thompson's military career, won not with weapons, but with wisdom, patience, and love.